Hello, I'm Erica Hill in today for Brooke Baldwin. You're watching CNN, and we begin this hour with breaking news out of Washington, where on a day when he was supposed to report to prison, Michael Cohen is instead back on Capitol Hill in a closed-door session with the House Intelligence Committee. And with him today, new documents which show edits to its false written statement about the Trump Tower Moscow project, a statement he gave to the same committee in 2017. But not before, Cohen says, the president's lawyers made the edits, a claim Cohen made last week in his public testimony before another House committee.
There were changes made, additions, Jay Sekulow for one.
Were there changes about the timing? The question of...
Gentleman's time has expired. You may answer that question.
There were several changes that were made, including how we were going to handle that message.
Mr.
Which
Brooke,
was...
were you finished?
Yes, the message, of course, being the length of time that the Trump Tower Moscow project stayed and remained alive.
Jay Sekulow called Cohen's allegations that Trump's lawyers edited or changed his statement to Congress completely false. Cohen's repeat appearance today on the Hill is just one of a number of oversight efforts by House Democrats. The House Judiciary Committee, of course, kicking off the week with an explosive list of 81 people and entities in President Trump's orbit that they want answers from as part of broad investigations, including they're asking for answers from his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's on that list, but not his daughter, Ivanka, a senior advisor. This, too, as there is new reporting from CNN about the president's hand in security clearances for both Jared and Ivanka. There is a lot to get to. Ellie Honig is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York and a CNN legal analyst. So, Ellie, I want to start first with this new reporting that we have from Manu Raju about Michael Cohen showing up today with these documents. So they reportedly show edits to the false written statement that he delivered to Congress in 2017. I do want to point out we don't know exactly at this point what they show was specifically changed. But if you're hearing this, if you're watching this, if you're the president's attorneys or the president, how concerned are you?
Somebody ought to be very concerned here. We don't know exactly who, but somebody. DOJ gave us a very important clue on this. When Mueller put in his sentencing memo for Michael Cohen, he was listing the various topics that Cohen had cooperated about of significance. And one of those was the quote, circumstances of preparing and circulating his false Senate testimony. So that tells me a couple things. First of all, you do not list that as a prosecutor unless it's a source, something you believe, first of all. So Mueller believes and presumably has proof that there were others involved in circulating and viewing this testimony. The other thing is you don't list it in someone's cooperation agreement if they acted alone. It doesn't really count as cooperation if Michael Cohen just says, I did this all by myself. There has to be somebody else involved. Now, who that person is, I think is up to conjecture, but somebody needs to be very worried right now.
Here's the other issue, too, because we don't know specifically what was changed.
Yep.
What if the statement that was already there was false to begin with? What does that do for Michael Cohen?
Yeah, so one of the key legal issues is what we call materiality, meaning was the change something that mattered or was it something peripheral? Were they just sort of tweaking with the grammar, the syntax? But if it was changed from something that was true, that the Trump Tower Moscow project went into the summer of 16, to something that was false back to January, that's exactly what Michael Cohen pled guilty to lying about. So if somebody else scratched out that date and made it earlier, that's big trouble.
All right, it'll be interesting to see as we learn more about that. And we will continue to follow that as we learn more from Capitol Hill throughout the day as well. Also want to bring in another voice here to talk about the other legal issues we're looking at today. Bradley Moss specializes in security clearance law. And we brought you in specifically, Bradley, because CNN does have this new reporting about President Trump, that he pressured John Kelly and the White House counsel, Don McGahn at the time, to give Ivanka Trump security clearance, despite both men recommending against it. And that, of course, is directly at odds with what Ivanka Trump said in an interview with ABC just a couple of weeks ago. Take a listen.
The president had no involvement pertaining to my clearance or my husband's clearance.
So no special treatment?
No.
Listen, there are a lot of things that are possible here. It's possible, Bradley, that she did not know it all. We do know the president has the authority to grant security clearance. But as you look at all of this and the reporting there about the pressure, what does it raise in terms of concern for you?
Well, it raises the very obvious concern that legitimate security risks, things that would stop a normal person applying for a clearance to get one, to be granted that access, were overlooked, were glossed over, were ignored because the president wanted to give this access to his daughter and to his son-in-law. And this is why we had an anti-nepotism law. This is what we always feared was going to happen, that when you brought these two in, that it didn't matter what security was going to say, the president was going to overrule them. And if that was the case, why did we bother going through the vetting? If there was no way he was going to accept no, why did he waste everybody's time? He has, as you noted, the president had the authority to just grant them these clearances, but he didn't. He put them through the process, and then when security said, this is too much, there's too many foreign contacts, too much foreign finance, he went, I don't care, get it done, give them the access anyways.
Ellie, we know that the House has raised questions about security clearances. The White House pushing back on some of those yesterday, basically saying that this is complete overreach here. This has nothing to do with legislation. Chairman Cummings coming back and saying, listen, this is all about oversight, separation of powers, insert congressional duty here. With this latest reporting, what does that do to those requests, do you think? Does it add any more meat to them, or is it?
Yeah, look, this is a preview. We're going to see a lot of this over the coming months, where one of the House committees requests documents. The White House, apparently, one of the strategies seems to be to just stonewall, right? The response to the request for documents about Jared Kushner was basically this string of technical-style objections from the White House. So the next step is, are we going to see a subpoena? If we see a subpoena, then we're going to see rubber hit the road. Then we could end up in court fighting over the scope of these requests and whether they can be compelled to turn them over.
Bradley, just in terms of security clearances, too, remind us who actually needs them. Ivanka Trump is a senior advisor in the White House. Is that a position that would require security clearance at a very high level?
Not necessarily, but it all depends on the nature of your portfolio and your responsibilities. So Jared Kushner was obvious. He's handling out a lot of foreign policy issues. You have to have access to intelligence in order to properly do that work. With Ivanka Trump, it's not quite clear what her portfolio encompasses beyond things such as paid leave, things that are obviously very important but are more of a domestic side. But if she was going to be granted that access, she had to go to the vetting. She had to submit the paperwork. And just like everybody else, she should have been adjudicated on the merits, whether or not there was a legitimate security concern that warranted denying her. But that did not happen here.
Bradley Moss, Ellie Honig, appreciate it. Thank you both.
Absolutely.
The crux of the president's national emergency declaration taken to task today on Capitol Hill as Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen was grilled over the president's push for a wall at the southern border, the asylum process, and the deaths of migrant children in U.S. custody. Democrats also outraged that Secretary Nielsen still could not provide them with the number of migrant children currently separated from their parents.
Are we putting children in cages as of today?
Children are processed at the border facility stations that you've been at. Some of them.
And I've seen the cages. I just want you to admit that the cages exist.
Sir, they're not cages.
What are they?
Areas of the border facility that are carved out for the safety and protection of those who remain there while they're being processed.
Can you give me the numbers of how many children have died?
Yes, I can. If you'll give me 1 second, I just don't want to misspeak. But this last year we had, or so far this year, we've had 3, as you know, in CBP custody.
So far, Madam Secretary, are you expecting more children to die?
No, ma'am. I just want to be accurate with the time. To be clear,
any asylum seeker who comes to a port of entry, you basically have just said
their claim.
Okay, well, let me tell you, Madam Secretary, either you're lying to this committee or you don't know what's happening at the border.
Did you initiate the separation of families for the express purpose of deterring families from coming to the United States?
No, I did not. Again, the whole purpose of that was to increase consequences for those who choose to break the laws. We increased the number of prosecutions. We didn't make up the law. The law was already there. Former administrations also referred adult parents for prosecution. We took the prosecution numbers from about 20 to about 55%.
That last lawmaker who you just saw there questioning Secretary Nielsen is with us now. Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, good to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
In that questioning, Secretary Nielsen was asked about the number of children separated from their parents, a number that she said she had but not with her. Just to be clear, Secretary Nielsen knew what this hearing was about. Did it surprise you at all that those numbers were not readily available for her?
It did. I mean, to be honest, I'm someone who spent a lot of time testifying in front of Congress before I became a congresswoman. And I assumed she knew we would ask that question, so I was a bit surprised she didn't have the number at hand.
At one point, the secretary was also asked about the sexual abuse that is happening during the journey for some of these folks. And she said that DHS gives a pregnancy test to every girl over the age of 10 once they are in custody. Can you tell us any more about that and why they are giving pregnancy tests to girls 10 and over?
Yeah, I mean, I think she talked at length about the horrible sort of situation we're in with the trip from these Central American countries all the way up to our border and how much risk there is to young girls. Really, really heavy reports of sexual violence against women and girls. So they've taken this decision as a precaution, I guess. And no one disagrees that it's a perilous journey to go from these countries up to our border, and I think that's what she was emphasizing.
As you said, no one disagreed that it was a perilous journey. Do you agree that the pregnancy tests are necessary?
I don't know. It surprised me. I think that they're probably just trying to make sure that if people are coming to the border, that particularly given how much focus there is on the medical situation with these folks, that they just do everything to make sure they know what's going on.
Were you satisfied overall this morning with the answers you were getting?
I mean, I got to tell you, I'm a former CIA officer and Pentagon official. I've worked on preventing homeland attacks my entire life. So I'm actually a big believer in border security and more border security. But the issue of separation of families at the border, of young kids being taken away from their parents, it's just a moral issue that we as Americans, we don't want representing us. And I was not satisfied that she sort of got it, that she understood that people, no matter what the policy was, no matter what the law was, that we don't put kids in cages. So I found that lacking, and I just feel like as a country we can't accept that.
There's been a lot of talk to you about the most recent numbers, and as you point out, you have a lot of experience when it comes to what is happening at the borders with security, obviously. CBP reporting 76,000 people were apprehended crossing illegally or without papers in February. That's the highest number of encounters in any February over the last dozen years or so. What are you attributing that increase to?
I was really surprised, to be honest with you. I just assumed that all the media focused on the border would deter people from coming, and the fact that the numbers are up is really disturbing. And I think part of that has to do with what's going on in their home countries, right? They're just fleeing, they're leaving terrible situations, they want hope, and they see us as a place where hopefully they can have a life for their kids. But I was really surprised by that. I'm from Michigan, so we're a northern border state, and it's just something we're all paying attention to try and understand why it's happening. We don't know yet.
As you're trying to understand all of these things, as you point out, as you're trying to get sort of everybody on the same page about what needs to be done, is the focus in the right place at this point in terms of the conversation that is happening in Washington?
Well, listen, I think unfortunately, it's become a hot potato, a political hot potato. Again, I was trying to direct the secretary to focus on the northern border, not just the southern border. There's way more people on the watch list coming through our northern border. I think the focus on the southern border has meant that we've maybe taken our eye off the ball in other places where we're doing extremely, extremely important work. And I think it's taken an issue that should be front and center, the security of our country, and made it too political.
I do want to just get your take on this as well. Your colleague in the House, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, announcing she plans to file a resolution to impeach the president. Do you support that?
I don't. Rashida's from my home state of Michigan, and I have always said, to me, I did not get elected to spend the next 18 months on a political process of impeachment. I want to know that if we're going to go through this as a nation, that it's because we have real substantial proof that we're basing that off of. So I'm going to wait for the Mueller report. I'm a big believer in Bob Mueller. He was the FBI director when I was a baby CIA analyst. I really believe in him, and I'll read every page of that report and act accordingly. But no, I don't support moving ahead right now at this time.
Congresswoman Slotkin, appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
This just coming in, the DNC slamming the door on the possibility of Fox News hosting a Democratic debate after a damning report this week. We'll discuss. Plus, a last-minute attempt to keep President Trump at the table. Hear what North Korea tried to do as we learn Kim Jong-un has restarted activity, it appears, at one missile site. And a stunning CNN investigation, how the former clients of the acting Interior Secretary got so-called favors.
Excuse me, sir. Drew Griffin with CNN. Can we have a few moments of your time?
Everyone's got to listen to Mom. When it comes to
CNN, a second federal judge has blocked the Trump administration's effort to add a citizenship question to the U.S. Census. Now, you may remember Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross added the question to the upcoming 2020 survey. This judge in the Northern District of California concluded Ross ignored federal law by adding that question. The administration has appealed a previous ruling from New York, which will soon go to the Supreme Court. Census professionals have argued adding a citizenship question would produce inaccurate results. While Michael Cohen may be speaking to Congress voluntarily, those who are still a part of President Trump's orbit taking a rather different approach, some of them anyway, according to House Democrats, who claim the White House is pushing back on the information the Democrats say they need to do their job. CNN politics editor-at-large Chris Cillizza joins us now from Washington. I guess we knew this might happen, huh?
Yeah, look, this is in some ways nothing new under the sun, Erica. When Congress, or at least a chamber of Congress, is controlled by one party, the White House is controlled by another, there's a lot of this that goes back and forth. But let's put some numbers to it, and then let's pan out and talk big picture. Okay, these are numbers from our CNN's own Lauren Fox's reporting. These are Democratic numbers worth noting. Okay. We've already had 6 refusals to appear before House committees by people within the Trump administration so far this year. Not uncommon, but does matter in that appearing before committees is a way that you conduct oversight. We saw it today, by the way. DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen appears in front of a committee, gets questions asked for, sometimes hard questions. Okay, 30 refusals to respond to or slow-walking document requests from committees. So a lot of what Congress does in terms of oversight and accountability is say, well, what's the paper trail on this? How did we get to the point we're at? You saw this with Benny Thompson, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, today with Nielsen, essentially saying, we've made a lot of these requests for information. We really haven't heard in a timely manner why. And then this one, 2 refusals by administration officials to come in for interviews, to just come in for interviews, right? That's a level of stonewalling. That's not a public hearing, even a private hearing. Just come in for interviews, maybe just with staff. So what do you make of all of this? Well, let's remember context, Erica. This all came before this page. It came before what we saw on Monday. Jerry Nadler, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, coming out and saying, we've written letters to 81 entities and people in the Trump orbit. We want them to either come in or bring us information. All of this is going to be added on to what we just went through, and I'll put one that's on here right here that I think may be the biggest fight, the one that goes maybe all the way up to the Supreme Court. Remember, the Ways and Means Committee chairman under IRS law has the ability to look at any individual's tax returns. It's a 1924 code provision within the tax code. Richard Neal, who's the chairman of that committee, Massachusetts Democrat, is going to ask Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, for Donald Trump's tax returns. Steve Mnuchin is not going to comply, just like we showed on that last page. Then the fight begins. Do they subpoena those returns? Does the administration respond to those subpoenas? My guess, big legal fight that eventually bumps potentially all the way up to the Supreme Court, which could come in the middle of the 2020 election, doing something we know the court doesn't like to do, Erica, which is wade into a very white-hot political debate in the middle of a political campaign. So this is not just hypothetical. This is not just theoretical. This is stuff that's going to have real-world implications in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and very quickly. All right, Chris Cillizza, good to see you, my friend. Thank you. More on our breaking news. The president's former fixer, Michael Cohen, providing Congress with new documents today as he tries to explain past discrepancies in his testimony. Plus, North Korea apparently restarting activity at a missile site after talks collapsed with President Trump. This, as we learned, Kim Jong-un wasn't ready to walk away from the table. The future of U.S.-North Korea negotiations. 2 respected North Korean monitoring websites say they have observed activity at the site in the days surrounding the summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Trump. That second summit, of course, that abruptly ended without a deal last week. Jim Sciutto is CNN's chief national security correspondent. So how much, Jim, should we be reading into these images?
It's a big deal, I think, for 2 reasons. One, the timing. So this activity is happening in the midst of the summit. You know, the U.S. president has flown halfway around the world to meet face-to-face with the North Korean leader. This is definitely message sending by the North Koreans, and particularly because North Korea knows that U.S. satellites are flying overhead. They know that when they have activity like this and they move vehicles and they open stuff up and do construction, it's going to be spotted. So it was a little bit of like, hey, look at us.
Right.
which is a message to say, we still have these capabilities, and if you might say, if talks go south, we could easily turn back to this kind of activity.
Well, speaking of the talks, which went, I guess, somewhat south, you actually have some new information as to what was happening inside those
Yes,
meetings.
I mean, a big swing, and this is joint reporting with myself, Kylie Atwood, and our White House colleagues Kevin Liptak and Jeremy Diamond, is that an enormous swing in this summit, that at the very start, it started off badly. Mike Pompeo flew out there early to meet with the chief North Korean negotiator, Kim Young-chol, and he was stood up. He waited for hours. Now, of course, the leaders were coming and they were going to meet face-to-face, and they did meet face-to-face, but this was an important meeting to set up those top-level talks, and that perhaps a sign as to how the broader negotiations would go. Now, as you know, the two sides walked away from the table without an agreement, but we also learned that in the final moments, as Donald Trump is preparing to leave Hanoi, preparing to leave the hotel where those negotiations took place, that another North Korean envoy made a last-ditch effort to resurrect the talks, to resurrect the chance of an agreement, a Hail Mary, you might call it, delivering a personal message from Kim Jong-un saying, perhaps we can make this exchange. This is an exchange we've talked about a bit before, shutting down one nuclear facility in exchange for the relaxation of some of those sanctions. But there was not enough specificity in the view of the U.S. side, and therefore that last-ditch effort it basically fell on deaf ears, and they walked away.
So that last-ditch effort, though, the fact that it was there may have fallen on deaf ears. That clearly says the door is open, one might think. So what does this mean? I mean, what are next steps here?
It is, and that's the positive read, is that, yes, they walked away. They couldn't reach agreement there. But if there was a willingness, right, to say, okay, perhaps we can discuss again this possible exchange. Again, one that was thought about. I mean, there were discussions about it. Of course, the devil's in the details. So that offers some hope. They have not set the next round of talks. They certainly have not set, and the president made no commitments to a Kim-Trump summit. And we're still waiting for details as to when lower-level negotiations might take place.
Right.
But,
and we've got these images.
And we have these images.
And we actually, I think, now have the president actually talking about North Korea.
Okay, we're moving along. We're discussing that with Lindsay and Mitt. They're moving along well. We'll see what happens. They're either going to be a good deal or it's not going to be a deal. But I think they're moving along very nicely.
Mr. President, do you have any message for Republicans who are going to vote against the
breaking a promise by rebuilding a key missile launch site?
Well, we're going to see. It's too early to see, but we have to solve a problem. We have a very nasty problem there. We have to solve a problem. The relationship is good. I would be very disappointed if that were happening. It's a very early report. We're the ones that put it out. But I would be very, very disappointed in Chairman Kim, and I don't think I will be, but we'll see what happens. We'll take a look. It'll ultimately get solved. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
The president sending a message there, Jim, very clearly to Kim Jong-un.
I mean, if the activity at the missile site was a North Korean message, here's the president. I'd be very, very disappointed. Remember, this is a president who has touted the personal relationship, and you might say that's a personal message to Kim saying, what's going on here?
And just remind us again on these satellite images. So there's sort of a date range, right? We don't know the exact date that all of this was happening, and that's important.
It is, but we do know it happened either in the days leading up to or during the talks or just after, each of which would be troubling in its own right. Regardless, while they had this high-level visit around that time, they were willing to, you could say rattle the saber a little bit to remind people we have these missile sites and we could start them up again at any time.
Absolutely. All right. Well, certainly not the last we've heard of this, Jim. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Nice to see you, too.
Up next, a CNN exclusive, how former client of President Trump's acting Interior Secretary got their request granted not once, not 2 times, 15 times.
Excuse me, sir. Drew Griffin with CNN. Can we have a few moments of your time?
The man President Trump has nominated to lead the Department of the Interior after his predecessor resigned amid allegations of ethics violation is raising eyebrows. David Bernhardt is a former oil lobbyist. He now has oversight of the industry he once represented. He's serving as Interior Secretary while waiting to be confirmed. And as CNN has learned, Bernhardt appears to have been working overtime to grant favorable requests to his former clients. CNN senior investigative correspondent Drew Griffin has more.
It was advertised as a press conference. Acting Secretary of the Interior David Bernhardt.
Good afternoon.
Visiting the Martin Luther King Jr. National Park. But when the speeches were over,
That's going to conclude our press conference today.
it was clear Bernhardt wasn't about to take any questions.
Sir, excuse me, sir. Drew Griffin with CNN. Can we have a few moments of your time? We thought this was a press conference, and we thought we'd get a few questions to ask you. We're doing a story, sir. Can you just stop for 1 second?
Go ahead and reach out to my press shop, and
We
we'll make
did.
sure.
There may be a good reason Bernhardt and his staff are uncomfortable about questions on camera, because since he's been at the Department of Interior, a curious pattern has emerged.
And the fact that more than a dozen of your former clients have been getting favors through the Department of Interior since you joined.
You're welcome to contact
the department.
press
Is
office.
that just a coincidence?
Since Bernhardt joined the agency, the Department of Interior has made at least 15 policy changes or decisions specifically requested by his former clients that benefited them, according to a CNN analysis.
Yes, we're seeing a raft of favors, both large and small, being granted. Everything from specific projects getting green lights to larger policies that are either being rolled back from the Obama administration or moved forward in the Trump administration.
David Bernhardt defines the Washington, D.C. revolving door, moving between government jobs to a major lobbyist for the oil and gas industry. Now this oil and gas lobbyist is back in government service. Appointed first as Deputy Secretary of the Interior by President Trump in 2017, and promising in this ethics letter not to be involved, to recuse himself from any decisions involving 26 different groups, mostly in oil and gas, that he has lobbied for, but only for a certain amount of time. Curiously, 13 of his former clients have gotten what they wanted from the Department of Interior since Bernhardt's been there. And one name keeps popping up again and again, the Independent Petroleum Association of America, or IPAA. One of the group's requests, do something about the sage grouse.
The deteriorating health of the bird has sparked the largest land conservation effort in U.S. history.
In 2015, the Obama administration implemented a protection plan for the bird, which meant lots of federal lands across the West would be either off limits or more difficult for oil and gas exploration. The IPAA, Bernhardt's former client, repeatedly lobbied department officials to loosen restrictions. Records reviewed by CNN show Bernhardt involved in 3 meetings with Interior officials on the issue. IPAA and other groups thanked Bernhardt for his involvement, and by December of 2018, the Trump administration released a plan to amend sage grouse protections and open vast swaths of western land for oil drilling. The industry requests and actions taken go on and on. Fracking, offshore drilling, easing of safety requirements, former clients asking and receiving favorable decisions from the government agency run by the former oil lobbyist.
We're talking about the literal fox guarding the henhouse, but this administration doesn't seem to mind the notion that a lobbyist is going to now regulate the very industry that they used to work for.
Bernhardt's spokesman said the acting secretary is fully in compliance with his recusal agreements, and critics who say he is granting favors are categorically incorrect, either misunderstand the law, regulations, and the acting secretary's ethics pledge, or they are deliberately misleading. Myron Ebel with the Competitive Enterprise Institute defends the acting secretary's actions this way.
Dave Bernhardt is not pursuing his agenda or that of any people he worked for as a lawyer. He's pursuing the agenda that President Trump won the election on and is implementing.
But the acting secretary isn't so eager to talk about any of that.
I'm happy to visit with you at any time. Right now is not the time, but go ahead and talk to my press folks. We'll set something up.
Okay, just to be clear, your press folks have told us that you are inaccessible for the next several weeks. So
they haven't talked to me, so I'll talk to them.
We
have a flight to catch, sir.
Within minutes of this conversation, Bernhardt's staff in Washington was sending an email to CNN confirming there will be no interview. Drew Griffin, CNN, Atlanta.